Hi everyone, and welcome to the launch of the Commission on Equity and Opportunities report, A Hope for Success, a look at employment opportunities for the Reentry community. So the Commission on Equity and Opportunity is a public policy arm of the legislature that uses evidence-based best practices to inform public policy for the minority populations in the state of Connecticut, more specifically the African American, Latino, Puerto Rican, and Asian and Pacific Islander community. So that's who we are. Why we're here. So the legislature mandated the Commission on Equity and Opportunity to do this study and talk about reentry and employment. So that's the reason why the commission's here. Why am I here? This for me is personal. So my husband, like many black men in America, has a criminal record. I'm gonna tell you a story. It's not his story, but it's a story like many others for the people who some who are here, some who are not able to be here, because this journey is one that's really hard. So in 2011, I was the legislative aide for Representative Tersiak. This young woman walked into our office. She said, I need help with my expungement application. She, like many others, made a mistake. She was 19 years old. She worked at Best Buy, and she took a TV. That TV, though, earned her a grand larceny conviction. What does that grand larceny conviction mean? It means that at that point, she was 33 years old. She was not able to get a job. She struggled to find housing, and she just wanted a chance to make her life better and the life of her family. She thought, I paid my debt to society. Why am I still here? So I went with her through the expungement process, and I started to think, this system is broken. So my husband, like many, never talks about what happened, never talks about why he has that record. And I know it's that scarlet letter that kept him underemployed for a number of years and has been that thing that I think that keeps driving him to say to our young black son, make sure you do the right thing all the time. So this is a journey. It's a journey for me, it's a journey for everyone sitting around this room, and it's a journey for many. But it's Black History Month, so I want to say we have to talk about those who maybe not started the journey, but in this building. So Bill Dyson, who we have to really acknowledge all the work that he did to make sure that reentry is spoken about in this building and in this state. And I also want to talk about the Governor Malloy and his administration under Mike Lawler has done a lot of work to talk about the criminalization of people of color and really thinking about how do we make changes that will help this population. And Senator Winfield, who hasn't been here, when I came into this building in 2011, he's the person that I constantly talked about this and talked about this community and made me understand beyond levels that I did at that time why this was so important. And so today we have Representative Porter and Representative McGee, who I think have taken that torch and they're now fighting for this community. So we all know all the reasons why this is important. Overcriminalization of people of color, overcriminalization of many offenses that people who don't look like me will get a slap on the wrist and get to walk away. But there's a lot of work that has been done. A lot of work has been done by many in this room. Many who you're going to hear from today will tell you about the best practices and why we need to be making investments in these things and others that will make sure that this community is successful. So in 2016, I decided, young me, I'm going to ban the box in Connecticut because this is the best thing that could happen. I learned a lot, but we were successful, but I also understood that it was more than just taking a box off of an application. It was about housing. It was about access to licensure. It was about access to not just a job, but a career. So those stories resonated with me through that process, which led to, in the next year, we took away the felony conviction that was a barrier for barbers and hairdressers. And in this session, we want to start addressing what are some of the barriers for certified nurses assistants who we think should be able to have a job and provide for their family, even though they have a felony conviction, which, as we all know, is that scarlet letter that dooms people for life. So we know what works. The study will tell you about what works. The partners will tell you about what works. And we know what we need to do. So it's time for this state and this nation to use the evidence, use the research, a lot of which is spelled out here. None of it's new. But it packages it and it gives it to the legislature in a way that makes them see that this is something that matters to our communities. But it's not just our communities. The reason why in 2016 we were able to ban the box and the board in the House was almost all green, now there's an opioid crisis. So this has spread beyond our communities. This is now something where you hear people saying, oh, we need to talk about restorative practices. Oh, really? Those conversations have been had for decades. But now it expands beyond New Haven, Waterbury, Bridgeport, Hartford, and starts to affect communities with people that don't necessarily look like me. So now it's a crisis. But hey, if it means we have to be opportunistic to make this happen, we have to make it happen. So this is something that I'm very proud to be a part of. I want to thank Representative McGee and all the partners who we worked with on this. Representative Porter and I became fast friends working on Ban the Box because this, for me, for her, for Representative McGee, it's personal. It's personal for many of us because this is a movement. And for too long, we've discredited whole communities of Black and brown men and women who have fallen victim to this society. So welcome, thank you for being here, and I'm happy to have you all here today.
I'm actually going to sit and not be behind a podium. But I would be remiss if I didn't just say thank you to Representative Robin Porter, co-chair of Labor Employees Committee, who really took the time and energy to provide space for this work to be elevated on her committee and to rally all of her colleagues to support an idea of a study. And you know, one would think a study is easy. It's real easy. You know, it's not controversial. It's fine. Everybody should support it. And it wasn't that easy. And so, Robin, thank you so much for your commitment, not only to Black and brown people, but for all people that have suffered as a result of the barriers they face. So thank you so much. I'm Brandon McGee. I'm so glad that each of you all are here. But before we get started, a few housekeeping tips. Sorry we don't have any water, so just drink up on the coffee. You'll be fine. The bathrooms, you know where the bathrooms are. Be sure when it's time for sort of that open dialogue within this conversation, please state your name. Those mics in front of you are they're televising, and so they want to at least have your name and organization that you represent. Likewise, behind me, good morning, everybody. State your name and the organization that you represent. So today is special for many reasons. Like Sabera, this is very personal to me. While I have never experienced being in the judicial system, I know firsthand the impact this has had on my family. My father, for many years, and God bless his soul, he passed away a few years back. But Brandon McGee Sr. experienced a lot when you talk about reentry. My mom would often joke. She would say, "Daddy has some frequent flyer miles," and I never knew what that meant until I was older and I understood that, number one, she was shielding me from a lot of things, but number two, this man, this loving man who had done wrong, had spent a lot of time in the judicial system. And so for maybe 10 or 11 years, I missed out on having that relationship that a child should have with their father. I could recall many a days where my father would be home crying because he could not identify or access employment for various reasons. And the same thing goes for many of the young people, many of the men that represent communities like Hartford throughout the state have faced with for many years. So the goals of this particular study, it's all outlined in the packet. I'm not gonna go verbatim over all of the data points. Today we're gonna talk about how do we move forward with the information that we are familiar with. So we have various stakeholders around this table, behind me, alongside the wall, that will share on where do we go from here. Where do we go with policy and where do we go without policy? How do we collaborate, real collaboration, to help the whole family, not only the person that we label as formerly incarcerated, but the wife, the children, the community, the employers that will have to support many of the individuals re-entering the community. So this study, the goals were to simply demonstrate the need for comprehensive wrap around services for the formerly incarcerated, which will assist them in long-term success. It examined the current reentry process and determined where changes can and could be made to assist reintegration. And lastly, and most importantly, provide recommendations to folks like myself that will help this population access gainful employment. So I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, but it's important that you all know that we affirm the work that you are doing, both within government agency, local community, private community. We applaud your work. And this is not easy. It's not an easy conversation to have, and it's damn sure not an easy piece of work, if you would, to help those re-enter in our community. So today I brought my posse, my crew, to help me communicate the need, the reasons as to why the work that they're doing, the work that you all support, the ideas that all of you have are extremely important. So I'll allow for them to introduce themselves, and we're gonna jump into a 10-minute conversation. So that means y'all each have like 3 minutes. And I'm so glad that the commissioner is here. A little under the weather, so if he eases out, it's okay. He needs to get better.
I'm not going anywhere.
All right, so he'll be here. But they'll talk about the work that they're doing. And again, I shared with these folks on the phone, I said, this study here, Sabira said it best, it's nothing new. It's nothing new. But it's important for me to elevate the work that all of you are doing throughout this state. And I want all of my colleagues, my friends that work here at the General Assembly to understand that it's more than just numbers. We're talking about human beings. And so if we could continue to have these open conversations, allow for CTN and Facebook and everybody else to help us tell our story, then that's what I'll do. All right? So I'll be quiet. I'll start to my left, your right. Robin, if you want to say anything, you could say something, and then I'll jump in with Commissioner Scott Semple. No, those aren't on. It's just CTN. Just speak loud.
Okay. Well, I want to first thank everyone that played a part in bringing this study together and bringing this information forward. A special thank you to Representative McGee, for being the legislator that took this bull by the horns and said, it's past time that we do something. And it has been my total pleasure and such a blessing to be able to help you bring this out of the Labor and Public Employees Committee to the forefront. Special thank you to Commissioner Semple. I don't know, many of you may or may not know, I have a son that was previously incarcerated. He has returned home, and I got to know Commissioner Semple before I even got here. And I didn't know him personally, I just knew him through his aura and how he moved through the building at the time, which was Garner Correctional Institute, where he was the warden. And for me, this is very personal. Never thought it would be my testimony, never thought it would be my son. I raised him better than that, he knew better than that, and yet that was the deck that I and my family were dealt, and we had to deal with it. And it has been one more experience. It has exposed me to the system of the Department of Corrections in an intimate and personal way, which I wish wasn't my experience. But I understand that sometimes we have a cross to bear. And I feel that this was one of my crosses to bear in this lifetime. Who would have ever thought that I would be sitting here with you all as State Representative Robin Porter of the 94th District for New Haven and Hampden? Not me. Wasn't my wish, wasn't my dream, wasn't on my bucket list, had no interest in this kind of work. But what I came to realize once I entered this building and began to do the work was that my life experience had called me to this place. Because the issues that impact my community and communities that looked like mine and look like mine did not have enough voices at the table. And I just want to speak briefly about a recent experience I had. When my son first got sent away, he was sentenced. He went to McDougal Walker CI. And I can remember having conversations with him on the phone. And you know, he would tell me about what he's doing and, you know, various parts of the institution where he would be and the roles he would play. And I'm sure there's a lot that he didn't tell me. But my personal prayer, when I went in my prayer closet, was, Lord, I wish that I could walk through those hallways just to see personally what it is he's experiencing and what he's going through. And I'm here to tell you, God answered my prayer on January the 23rd. I toured McDougal Walker CI. And I can't even put words to what that day meant and did for me and to me. And last night my son came by, I hadn't seen him in a minute, a few days, and we had a conversation. He's working. He had been in and out of work. He's back to work, one of the struggles that they have. And I brought it up. I said, you know, I went to McDougal Walker, you know, and I actually toured the facility. And I started telling him the different areas of the facility I was in. And instantly, in my spirit, I had to fall back. Because what I was getting through his body language was a conversation that he was not ready to have with me. So the one thing that I think that we don't talk about, and I want to stress here today, we talk about the barriers to employment and to housing and to transportation. But the thing we really need to talk about are the need for mental health resources. When he came home, that was one of the first things I discussed with him. You need to seek counseling. There's no way that you went there and did almost 7 years. He went in at 20, came home at almost 27. 7 years, a very pivotal time in his life, a very molding period of his life, incarcerated in a system that was designed intentionally, I believe, my personal belief, to dehumanize and to strip people of their dignity. You know, when I would think about how he would come out for a visit and that he would be stripped down, excuse the term, butt naked, just to have to see his family. And when he would go back in, he would have to go through that process again. And I understand the reasons that are given for that, but let's not acknowledge what it does to a person to have to go through those kind of tactics and you know, systematic mandates. It's mandated. The officers don't have an option. It's what they're charged to do. And the inmates, if they want to visit, they have to abide by the rules. I just think that, you know, it's generational. That's the other thing we don't talk about, and thank you for touching on that. Because he wasn't prepared to have that conversation last night, but after he left, I had to ask myself, am I prepared to hear that conversation? And how do I help him? How do I help him unload and unpack the baggage that he has come home with? Because I can tell you as his mother, he is not the same person that he was when he went there. And I know that he struggles every day to make it happen. And that there's so much pressure on him to succeed in a world that has put in place barriers to mark him for life. He did his time. He paid his debt to society. And in a couple of months, he will be through with it all. You know, you get released, there's parole sometimes, and then there's probation. He's on the tail end of this, on paper. On paper. But he has not even begun the journey of reestablishing himself mentally and spiritually financially, he's a dad. I have a grandson, 15 months old. He has a responsibility, and he needs to be able to provide. What are we going to do to help him get where he needs to be as a returning citizen who has paid his debt to society and can actually help to bring revenue to the state? We won't talk about the millions of dollars that we're losing by not employing returning citizens. So this is so multi-layered and multi-pronged for me. But I thank each and every one of you at this table and the ones that couldn't be here today for all the work, for the hands that are on the plows that I believe will till the ground and turn this soil over and make this America great for once and for all. Because until we deal with this population, we're never going to be where we need to be as a state and nationally. So thank you for giving us this platform, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to once again share my story.
Thank you. So just to, I'll introduce you all, and then we can jump into the presentation. Most times we get extremely emotional when it comes to this work, and I told Sabera last night that I will not cry. So if I do, I owe everybody coffee right behind us. So again, I have my posse here. I have Scott Semple, Commissioner of Department of Corrections. To my left here, I have Maureen Price Borland. She's the Executive Director of Community Partners in Action. You've met Sabera Gordon, Executive Director of Commission on Equity and Opportunity. Right next to her, Sue Gunderman, Greater Hartford Reentry Council. And last but definitely not least, we have Judy McBride from the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. So this study identified several barriers to reentry after incarceration. Housing, transportation, and mental health, just to name a few. What is the low-hanging fruit that policy could resolve? Of the barriers identified in the study, what can realistically we achieve in the short term, even if it's just a step towards a broader solution? And I'm just throwing out questions just to get the conversation started, but I want you all to talk about the work that you're doing. What can we achieve without policy? Are there any barriers that can be addressed through collective will, efficiency, and coordination of resources or other means? And then lastly, we know that stigma is more than just perception. It has impact. An employer might not think you are trustworthy enough for a job. A landlord may prejudge whether you'll abide by the terms of your lease. A conviction forever and materially changes how others view your integrity. We can't create policy around how others feel about the formerly incarcerated. What can we do about that? Is the answer to erasing stigma getting rid of the conviction altogether? So those are just a few thoughts for us to get this conversation going. I'd like for us to spend 5 minutes with my posse here and then open it up to those of you in the room to begin talking about how do we move this conversation forward. So any of you can jump in and take the conversation. Go with the commissioner.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Representative, for inviting me. And it's an honor to sit next to Representative Porter, who I must say calls me very frequently to talk about criminal justice issues. But if I can just get into a few things of how I feel very privileged to work for this governor, Governor Malloy. And I'll start with a story. And when Governor Malloy was considering me to be his commissioner, we met. And I was in his office, and he had me at hello, but he talked about mass incarceration. And he was very frustrated that it ever occurred in this country. And one of the things that he said to me that really made an impact on me was that when he talked about a mass incarceration, he said, we built all these prisons when we should have been building schools. And that's when he had me at hello. And we have a very unique situation here in Connecticut. We have a governor that gets it. We have an undersecretary of criminal justice who's nationally recognized, and you have a commissioner who's committed to making sure that we inject hope and dignity into our correctional system. So we have been working very, very hard to change the way that we do business, to fall under the category of correcting, not incapacitation, and to provide hope and dignity for the offender population. We don't always succeed, but we've been able to incentivize the system, whereas if people want to be accountable, we're prepared to be accountable to them. So we have set up a number of initiatives that were designed to complement the Governor's Second Chance initiatives, and we've launched those initiatives very quickly. And more recently, we announced one of our initiatives to reduce the female population here in Connecticut by 25%. And another more recent initiative was the implementation and creation of the TRUE unit. And this is a unit designed for emerging adults, age range of 18 to 25, which came to us from a visit to Germany back in June of 2015, which takes a whole different approach and understands the complexity of that age group in brain development and neuroscience, and understands that it's an impulsive group of folks. You know, when I came back from Germany and the governor was with me, I queried the population. And at the time we had roughly 16,000 and change, maybe a little bit higher in terms of what the overall incarcerated population looked like. And 3,200 folks were in that age group, and they were responsible for 25% of the incidents that were occurring in our correctional facilities, incidents that are unhealthy, that evolve around trauma exposure, not just directly but vicariously as well, and that speaks to what Representative Porter was talking about. These things are detrimental to correcting and to moving people forward in their life. So we should move and focus on trying to reduce the level of incidents to improve the overall wellness of our staff and the offender population, to change the culture, to move it in a positive direction. That's low-hanging fruit. That's humanity. And this is what we should do. The agency knows how to deal with the problems that challenge the system. Not everybody's on board, but we should never, never give up hope on anyone that's in our system. And I really appreciate Ms. Gordon's reflection and discussion about the opioid crisis, because I've been thinking about that a lot myself, and I have the pleasure of going to a number of different groups to speak about what the Department of Correction does. And when I go to Hartford and New Haven and Waterbury and Bridgeport, these are second chance communities. They get it. I'm speaking to the choir. I'm speaking to the choir now, the folks that are in this room. But when you go into areas of our state, they don't necessarily get it. There's not a lot of folks that touch the criminal justice system as they do in the urban areas of our state. But now the dynamics of that have changed. So here's the lemonade in the lemon of the opioid crisis. It is impacting the communities that traditionally have some level of fear about people who enter the criminal justice system. And they're challenging me to treat, and others, to treat this issue as a disease, and I agree. So we talk about stigma and the stigma of incarceration. Quite frankly, it can last a lifetime in this country. We call ourselves a forgiving society, but are we really? When can we move people forward in their lives? The good news is we're starting to see that. we're starting to see more of an interest of employers who want to employ folks who have entered the criminal justice system. I always thank our partners in the nonprofit community, because without their help, we would fail. And I think it's really important that we do not forget the work that gets done, the yeoman's work that gets done in the community once the 90+% of the offender population goes back into the community. So we can give you transportation, we can give you a job, we can give you a house, we can give you health benefits, but I think the real focus, and this isn't exactly low-hanging fruit, this is complicated, is how do we improve one's wellness? The stuff that got them there in the first place, and all of the circumstances that evolve around that. We can take new approaches, and I'll use the True Unit as the best approach. I wish I did that, or that was implemented 10 or 15 years ago, because we can have an impact, and we're seeing more people who are successful in the communities, but you don't read about them too much in the paper, do you? You read about the failure. It makes the front page. There is plenty of success of people who have left the correctional system, who are now law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. We need to hear their story. And some of the folks that have had that experience have been brave enough to share that story in our communities, and I strongly encourage them to continue to do that. I would put that in the category of low-hanging fruit. Increasing the level of humanity within our correctional systems, retraining our staff in terms of how to deal with the families of folks that are incarcerated, and trying to put more of an investment on the front end so that we can have a generational impact on what incarceration looks like in our country. So the good news in Connecticut, as I'm often informed by Undersecretary Lawler, is that crime is down. There are less people entering the system, there are less juveniles that are entering our system, and our population is aging. These are all really good signs. And I strongly encourage the next administration, Democrat or Republican, that comes into this building, that they continue to go down this road, because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm probably the dinosaur at the table because the organization Community Partners in Action, formerly Connecticut Prison Association, has been around for 142 years. And I, quite frankly, am very honored and privileged to serve in this role. What are you two doing?
Earl and I are having a conversation.
I'm so privileged to serve as the executive director of the organization. So I stumbled into this field, quite frankly, 30 years ago, and came out of a very short stint of working in the insurance industry. And a family member at the time said to me, well, what do you want to go over there and work with criminals? Why would you want to do that? And this experience has, it was an ex-husband, I guess that's why he is an ex-husband, because he's not understanding the value of it. And so, you know, it's become a passion, however, for the work that I do and the staff and what we've engaged in. And our organization, many years ago, used to have to stay very much under the radar. You know, the concept, we didn't want anybody to know where we were in terms of the space that we housed, or because there was also the issue of NIMBY. And there was the issue and concern about why would those do-gooders want to be able to serve the criminal justice population, and that they were not deserving of services. And so our journey for many years included kind of living in the shadows of that experience. And I would say probably it's been in the last 10 years that we've had the comfort in feeling that we're building a lot more partnerships and individuals who are really interested and committed to doing this kind of work. As a nonprofit, our funding is primarily dependent on state funding, and many of you also know what that journey has been like. You know, there have been significant cuts in ability to deliver those services, and it calls upon us as nonprofits to try to find more creative ways to continue to do our work, yet nonetheless to continue to be committed to it. So I want to highlight a couple things that in our organization, this acronym is CPA, has had to do in order to modify and adapt accordingly. We started an alternatives to incarceration program in the mid-'80s when there was a huge realization that we could not incarcerate our way out of this issue. The meaningfulness of continuing to build facilities just really was not prudent, and so alternatives evolved. And CPA started the first alternative incarceration center that was developed in the state back in mid-'80s. That evolution took us into then realizing that the juvenile services was an arena that needed attention. And this is one of those situations where we hope it's for a good thing that, you know, sometimes people say the best thing that can happen is that organizations like ours will no longer be needed. And in the juvenile arena, we've seen a reduction in kids being in the system, and so some of those programs were reduced accordingly. But we've also evolved in programs such as the resettlement program, which is a recognition that when you re-entered, as the other end of it, that people needed to have someone helping them in a meaningful way. And so the resettlement model meant that on the morning that the person got released, with no resources for those who were at end of sentence, not knowing where to go, somebody on the resettlement program met you when that vehicle dropped you off that morning and basically took you to breakfast as the first thing in trying to get you stabilized. And then there was a recognition of getting you housing, working towards reunifying with your family, putting all those systems in place as part of the process. The journey also took us quite recently in the realization, as funding continued to be cut, is what do we need to do to enter an arena that had not been developed with resources that we used to have. And so I want to put a little plug in. There's a restaurant at 280 Park Road called Zest 280, and it's part of the Pond House Cafe. Many of you may know the Pond House, but it's an arm of the Pond House. It is run solely and exclusively by people who are formerly incarcerated, and serves delicious food. At this point, it's only open for lunch. We hope at some point to expand it beyond that, but by getting some support from the community, we hope to enrich the restaurant. Another thing for us was the realization that the issue of substance abuse, as we've all discussed, continues to be an ongoing challenge. And so my board of directors made the decision on very limited resources within our coffers to self-fund a substance abuse program for young people, and that is located down in Hamden, Connecticut. And believe it or not, the numbers of individuals going to the program is not as great as we think. And part of the reasoning behind that is we made a commitment that we were going to do this for the juvenile justice population. This was not going to be a substance abuse program for people who can basically already afford those resources. And so the ability to compensate for those programming is somewhat limited. We also find, quite frankly, that kids in the urban areas tend to be more pot users than opioid users. And so when you're talking about trying to serve that population in that setting, the screening, et cetera, and delivery of services has a unique track to it. But thank you so much this morning for doing this. It is a conversation worthy of having. I must say sometimes, because I do get a lot of calls as it relates to people trying to have this dialogue. And the good part about it is that so many people are getting in tune to the practical side of doing this work. For too long, we stayed in the fearful side. And sometimes it makes me feel like, no, I got to pay attention to the work I'm doing. I really don't have time to entertain this. But thank you so much for pulling this together, for giving us an avenue to have this conversation and a venue to do so.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And I just want to acknowledge Representative Arthur O'Neill coming in today and sitting with us. Sue?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sue Gunderman. I am the chairperson of the Greater Hartford Reentry Council. And for the last 10 years, I've been blessed to be able to work for a program that has done workforce development for pre- and post-release for incarcerated parents across our state. Most recently, I've been the chairperson for the Greater Hartford Reentry Council, and it is one of 5 active roundtables right now currently taking place across our state. This collaboration was started with Andrew Clark, who's here, with Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy at CCSU. So the roundtables are New Haven, Bridgeport, obviously Hartford, Southeastern Connecticut, and Waterbury. And we're trying to get on 2 more roundtables, New Britain, and get Windham County back up and going as well. So we're expanding maybe even to Stanford. So these roundtables across our state are grassroots efforts. What do I mean by that? Basically, many of you in this room are part of my roundtable, and I'm blessed to be able to work with all of you in this room. It's state, it's local, it's municipalities, it's nonprofits, it's individuals who have come home from incarceration all at one table together. Every single month, we're there together, trying to identify issues in our communities, address gaps in services, and figure out ways to pool our resources together in order to best move forward, to support everybody coming home. Because eventually, like the Commissioner said, more than 90%, 95% of everybody incarcerated today will be coming home to our communities. And so it's important for all of us to figure out how are we going to work together. We're talking about, diminishing resources, and how are we going to pull together. And I think it's important for all of us to sit here. We are preaching a little bit to the choir, but we all need to sit and work together. And how can we do that? And I've been blessed in Hartford. For the last 6 years, we have done an employment and resource fair just for the folks coming home from incarceration. And so it's been successful. And it's just been one of those events that all of us pull together as members, CPA, CSI, all the members, Hartford Foundation, all of us. There's so many partners, I can't name them all, but all of us working together to be able to support this population. So that's just one event that we've done. We hope to continue that employment dialogue, having conversations, meaningful conversations with employers to build relationships. It's all about building relationships in our communities and building stronger ones. And so we felt this year, over this next year for Hartford, we will be building stronger relationships within our communities so that when people do come home, there's a place for them to go, a place for a job, a place for housing. Housing is another area we hope to be working on. Education, advocacy, resources, letting people know where to go. We had a conversation in our last meeting that a gentleman was released. He was homeless. He didn't know where to go. He did not know where to go for resources, and we can't have that. People need to know where to go for support. If I'm not the person who can support them, who can? And be able to share that information. So it's so important for all of us to work together. I'm blessed, CPA is stepped up and did an amazing thing.
I was just telling Brandon, how could I forget?
I won't steal your thunder. I won't steal your thunder.
So can I just really quickly
jump in, because then I'll tag team.
Because it's such a collaboration with Greg and others. Yep. And so, and the Hartford Foundation just recently funded a venture that is a collaboration between the City of Hartford and several other entities, the Department of Corrections at the table, Court Support Services Division, Central, Connecticut State University, Capital Workforce Partners, who am I forgetting? And as is the theme here is, what do people do when they get ready to come out? And After working on this for many years, we are pleased to say that yesterday we actually went to tour the future site of the Reentry Center for Hartford. It's been a journey in recognition, again, that people, when they're released on that day, especially people who are at end of sentence, EOS population, most of you know who they are, and have nowhere or no ability to be able to have themselves settled appropriately, that this center will be open. And the department, I'm putting Scott on the spot, but he's agreed, will now drop those individuals at this center every morning as part of that process. Dr. Sarah Diamond wrote a phenomenal report which basically highlights and talks about what it means for effective reentry. And so this is one step in that direction with some phenomenal partners. Thank you. Thanks for making me still look low.
No, and to have a physical space. Waterbury has a reentry center, so does Bridgeport, and now Hartford will have one as well. And we have been working on it for many years. And so it's an amazing thing to know that sometime this year it will be opened in Hartford. So it's an amazing thing. It's a place, it's going to be a physical place where people can go for resources and support. But it's also important for all of us in Hartford and across our state to figure out how can we, whether through advocacy, you're asking about low-lying fruit, what can the roundtables do to bring this voice, to bring everybody's voice together? And I think, if there's a common theme across our states, is it around employment, is it around housing, is it around what other issues, then I think we should pull together, because look at this room, it's pretty darn full of folks and of folks that aren't here. And so our voices are important. And the stigma, I had a gentleman, we've been talking about stigma, and I think how it follows individuals beyond, Sarah's shaking her head over here. It's so important that the stigma of incarceration, we can ask every employer to hire one and do all these things, these amazing things, but the stigma still follows them. If they go for an application for employment, if they go for an application for housing, if they go for an application on education, they're being constantly, pivoting on how do I talk about my record? Do I have to talk about my record? My record is following me. And so it's so important that we figure out how can we work on that piece of it in our communities. And that, whether through advocacy and conversation, we can do. So I thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Judy McBride, and I'm the Director of Grants and Partnership Investments at the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. I want to begin by thanking Commissioner Sample and Representative McGee for being really thought partners with the foundation. As everybody knows, we have resources, and we're proud to be committed to serving the residents in the 29 towns across the greater Hartford region. And we only can do that by really engaging with different levels of government that are also able to contribute to this work. We do this work because it impacts families as well as community safety. And we want to make sure we're really doing the best job we can to serve underserved communities, which this issue especially impacts. I appreciated all the personal stories, and my story is this. I worked at the U.S. Department of Justice in 1999, and I was the aide that received the assignment that we want to raise public awareness around most folks go home, and the need for a community effort, both in terms of government and others, in order to really impact the work. And so we came up with the phrase reentry. And now, in the year 2018, you see where we've come, and you see where we need to go much, much further. I think for me, on a human level, for everyone to recognize that all of us are more than our mistakes. And I think we do need, in terms of something that doesn't cost necessarily a lot, to raise up these stories. The men and women who have been incarcerated in fact, are also mothers and fathers. More than 22,000 dependent children have an incarcerated parent in Connecticut. There was a study that was issued back in 2016. So how do we help support the families? The impact on them is both economic and emotional. And at the root of this issue, as we've heard, is substance abuse, lack of housing, the employment issue that's well highlighted in the report is a serious one, because most employers aren't yet comfortable with the idea of hiring folks with a criminal record. Even though we've banned the box, it still comes up. And in fact, so many of the nonprofits like Maureen's program and all the folks at the Greater Hartford Reentry Council know that returning citizens really have to be counseled. Yes, we have supported programs like Best Chance. We've been supporting that since 2015 and the results are promising. We support programs like the Judy Doran Performance Project that works with children who have an incarcerated parent, and she also works with the parents, their parents who are on the inside, to make sure that they can stay connected. Children do not stop loving their parents when they go to prison. And as Representative McGee highlighted, and we know from organizations that focus on children of incarcerated parents, they don't know the story. It's kept, they've gone away. And where is not always, the kids don't know. So I think we're very much honored to be part of this dialogue. We're pleased that we are able to be part of the solution, but we can't do this alone. The foundation doesn't have, enough resources. Government doesn't have enough resources. So the idea of coordination and really being smart about how we're using existing and adding resources when we need to, it needs to be part of the dialogue. And I think we're going to also talk about the justice reinvestment model, which is a data-driven model. That's why the commission report is so important. That's why CPA's report that was done by Sarah Diamond that laid the groundwork to establish the real need for a reentry welcome center is so important. So I look forward to being part of this conversation.
Thank you. And I think that's a good segue into opening this dialogue to all of you in this room. But before I move forward, I just kind of want to define the justice reinvestment. And I think all of you may be familiar with it, but for those that are watching, justice reinvestment, that concept simply helps states to identify the drivers of rising costs and develop practical solutions to this population that we're talking about. I even go on to say in my letter, good policy is built from a breadth of input. Justice reinvestment brings together the data research and stakeholder ideas to develop state-specific policy solutions. So here in the state of Connecticut, while we are ahead of many of the conversations when you talk about reentry, we have to move this conversation further. Sure, we need more money. We know we do. But the reality is, if we, those of us in this room, do not take this conversation to another level, shame on us. Shame on us. So today, for me, is a start of another great session. I said it. It's a start for me to work with my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to figure out how do we move the conversation, the work that you all do forward. We have probably several, maybe even a dozen organizations represented here today. I see one in particular. I see Fred, but I'm looking over there at Marlo Barnes, who represents Our Piece of the Pie, a program whose work go far beyond just north end of Hartford, but providing opportunities to young people. I see Hartford's proud in this room. Terry, who, he and his wife provide opportunities to young people. While his program is not for the formerly incarcerated, it provides after-school programming for those young people to deter them from making bad decisions or mistakes, if you would. And that list goes on. I can talk about everybody in this room and the work that you're doing. So having said that, you heard sort of the presentations and my posse talk about the work that they're doing. I want to hear from you. You have policy recommendations around, they mentioned Andrew Clark in here, so maybe he's somewhere around here.
He's right over there.
Okay. Oh, there he is. He and Bill Dyson, former representative from New Haven, I talked to him 10:30 last night. I said, Rep, shouldn't you be asleep at 10:30? No, brother, this is some good work that you all are doing. And if you remember Bill Dyson, you know that these are the conversation he and other colleagues were having some years ago, and we're still working on it. From sentencing to pardon and parole, we're still talking about it. So the floor is open. The floor is open. All I ask is that when you tell your story, quickly get to a solution. I'll say that again. When you tell your story, quickly get to a solution and know that we have a room full of people that I'd love to hear. And if I'm looking down, it's because I'm scribing and I'm trying to take some notes and make sure I'm hearing what you have to say. All right? So we'll just start on this side and we'll work our way around. Just keep your hands raised or when it's time. And then we'll go ahead and start. So before we get to you, I'm going to start with the young lady in the back and then we'll jump around. State your name and organization.
Sure, I'm Sandy Lamonaco from Smart Justice, a new national campaign, but we're starting it in Connecticut, the criminal justice organizer, and all I have is a quick question. I just want to know how many formerly incarcerated people or indirectly impacted people are in this room right now. If you could just raise your hand. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Duffy Starks, Director of Harvard Proud Drill, Drum and Dance. I would like to thank Brandon McGee and Harvard Public Foundation for acknowledging us. My thing is, I was incarcerated. I went to jail in '94, got out in 2004. I did 17 off 20 for racketeering. My decision was to come out and make sure the kids in this community don't follow behind what I did. I had an impact on a lot of people, so my decision is to have an impact on a lot of youth in this community. So I do it over 100 kids a day. My thing is to replace dreams back into their lives. The city been putting darkness into them, so me and my wife is putting dreams back and hopes and determinations and building kids to be productive citizens of this community. So that's our determination. We put it into music. Because as everybody knows, music wakes the soul up and make you feel good all day, every day. You go to the hospital, you go into an elevator, you go into your car. To calm your attitude, to calm you down from going into work, you listen to music first. So we create that. We make the kids create that because there's too much negative music out here that impact their mind. So our thing is to impact their soul, to impact their thoughts of whether they should go the right way or the wrong way. I know the wrong way. I know the right way. I learned the right way by coming home. I've been home since 2004. My decision was not to go back, and I'm not going back.
That's right.
Personally, by the mistakes I did in life, I have 13 kids of my own. By numerous different girls. Sorry to understand that, but it happened. But now my decisions are showing these kids and never hinder my background from their parents or what I did and where I'm at now and what my purposes are. So what I do is sit down with the kids and give them back what they missing. Like I said, we have over 100-something kids. So if a kid come join us, we make sure they have an extra sibling. If they're missing an auntie or mom, we have that there. They're missing a father, they have me. I'm there to give them that replacement and give them that voice that they've been missing at home. So when they go home, they're comfortable, they have a dream, they have something to think about. We have kids that came from straight A's and D's. Now they're on the honor roll. Got 5 kids scholarships last year for this year. We got 3 in Monroe College, one is North Carolina, and the other one in Manchester, because she did not want to leave home. So we try to keep a good track record and keep it going on with these youth. And one thing about Hartford Proud, there's not one person that can call us that we won't go perform for and let these kids incite themselves. So that's all it's about. We have fun, we have enjoyment, and we let these kids understand life is more important than just a quick thought of negativity. I mean, negativity is very easy to comprehend, but it's hard to be positive. And that's what we gotta let these kids know. You know, it's not about us no more. We gotta start listening to them. We done told these kids, this is good for you. This is the college you need to go. This is the job you need. This is what you need to do. Let us listen to what they want to do and follow behind them and help them build their dreams instead of giving them my dreams. You know, thank y'all for listening.
Thank you.
I gotta go to work, and I still got 100 and some kids to take care at 4:30 this afternoon. So I thank all of y'all for listening and acknowledging Hartford Proud, from being part of this community and doing what we do and the work that we do in this community. And again, y'all have a blessed day.
Thank you. I see a hand back there, then we'll come to this young lady up here, but before we get to the both of you, I'm just going to allow for Andrew to make a few comments.
Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate what you're doing here today and the opportunity, and I hate to cut in the line here, but I also have to leave. I have a sick child at home that I have to get to, and having worked for Representative Dyson, one of the things, I was always horrible at public speaking, but he always impressed on me, if you have a chance to use the mic, use it. So if you have something to say it. And I feel being part of this, I have a few things that I'd like to just impart some things to consider. The first is, you know, it's been referenced, I never thought I'd be doing this 20 years later. You know, Representative Dyson was from the 94th District, which is Representative Porter's district. He had 2 sons that had been incarcerated. There's a lot of warriors in this room that have been fighting this fight, that have been bringing attention to this issue when it wasn't very easy to do. And Maureen referenced that earlier, and Scott Semple would know that. One person that I'd like to point out who was a warrior at that time, and you might not think this from the beginning, but the conversations that we were having at the legislature, we were having across the aisle. And there were people that, as Commissioner Semple mentioned, that had constituencies that weren't directly impacted by this. And if they were informed by the media, if they were informed by their constituencies on the Tough on Crime movement, they would not be apt to want to listen to this conversation. But you had people like Representative Arthur O'Neill that were there 20 years ago, that were willing to listen, that were willing to put away rhetoric, that were willing to work across the aisle and say, how can we do this better for our entire constituency, for the entire state? And I just hope that continues forward. We have a new crop of legislators that are pushing this ball forward, and I just want to impress that that's an important thing to keep in mind, that we can all do this together and we can make it better. Another thing is I've seen over the 20 years is cities did not own the people coming back into their community. They owned the front end. They owned the arrest, but they didn't own the coming back. And what Hartford Foundation and Maureen and others are doing in terms of the Reentry Center, I know that's happening in New Haven and Bridgeport as well, is a tremendous opportunity. We have a system where the state pretty much takes ownership of those who are incarcerated. It's not the case in the rest of the country. But we have a chance now with strong leadership in the mayoral level to really take ownership of people coming back. And until we do that, until we have a system where the state and the cities talk to each other and everybody owns this issue, we're not going to move the ball forward as we'd like to. And you talked about information, justice reinvestment. Connecticut was the first state in the nation to do justice reinvestment, and Commissioner Semple was there at the time. Maureen was there, and others were there in the room. And we made a lot of progress with that, but there's still progress that could be made. And you know, one of the measures that we look at in terms of how well people are doing is how well they fail. I mean, we have always just looked at recidivism, and I love this report and what Sabira put together and Representative McGee in talking about we have to look at other measures. We don't know what's happening with people in the state that are coming out unless we know they're failing. We need to know about their public health. We need to know about their well-being. We need to know in order to be able to continue to push forward so that we're not sitting at a 50% recidivism rate 20 years from now. We have not moved that needle enough, and we can. We can with the cities owning it. We can with more in-depth information. We can by changing the dialogue about, instead of looking at failure, let's look at success and how do we get more success. And we have people in places that can help make that happen. Mike Thompson, who was the head of the Justice Center and the Council of State Governments, started in this room. He was overseeing 7 people in New York City, and he grew a shop that was helped put together as a second chance legislation in the federal government. And now the Council of State Government Justice Center is 400 people across the country helping to bring information to this issue. He left the Justice Center, but he's at Pew. He's second in charge at Pew, and I know he's going to want to continue to do this type of work there. But who now took his place is Megan Quattlebaum, who was at Yale University, also a Connecticut native. So we have 2 key people from Connecticut that we can help bring to this issue and marshal resources so that Connecticut can be the leader, can continue to be the leader. And I really just hope that we can all come together and keep pushing and doing this work, and I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Judy Dwarren from Firms Project. And I just wanted to say, first of all, that it's fabulous to have everybody here. And the work that we do inside the prison, we've been working at York and now at Cybulski for lots of years, and we have a wonderful collaboration with CPA and resettlement. And I think that it's that idea that Andrew just brought up of well-being and thinking about what constitutes well-being when someone leaves prison. And I think we think about it as a job and housing and all of those things, which I think are really important. But it's also how the experience is processed and how you can have supports that they experience inside when they get out. So we find that we're really struggling to keep in touch with the men, the dads that we work with, and so that they can, the work that we do can be reinforced on the outside. And that's something we're able to do through resettlement and with the women that come out of York in a small way. But I think in those ways we'll be able to achieve success when we think about the whole person coming out. And that it's not just specific things, but it's also how that person is doing. I think you were talking about your son in the beginning. It really struck me because it's how is he really working on what happens when he gets home and how he connects what happened to him inside with his life on the outside. And there's so many pressures out here that these women and men don't even know about when they have no idea of until they get out. So I think if we can all work together, I know we can't do our work that we do without a really wonderful sense of cooperation from the Department of Correction, from CPA, from the schools we work with when we work with kids. And so it's going to be through that cooperative effort, but it's also listening to the things that you might not think are important. Very often the arts are thought of as an extra. The arts, we've seen the arts get to a fundamental change with the men, with the women, and with the kids that we work with on the outside. So don't narrow the picture, because I think partly the picture being narrowed is why the success doesn't get to be better than it is. So just wanted to put that out there, and thank you all for listening and for being here.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Piatti. I actually work at Second Chance Planning, Anti-Recidivism, and Recovery Program. But I also have a felony larceny conviction on my record. And not too long ago, over 2 years clean and sober, college degree, Navy veteran, recovery support specialist, state certification. I found myself offered a great job, told them honest about my record and my past, and the day before I was supposed to start, I had already quit my prior job as overnight manager at McDonald's. They recanted the offer due to my criminal record. And I really like how people were talking about the mental health and the addiction, because I actually actually committed my crime during active addiction, and so many of us do. And I actively used because of mental health issues, because of depression, and because of anxiety. And when that happened to me, and I couldn't find a job, and here I am, a single mother with 2 children, I started to go into a serious depression. And just the experience of not being able to find a job, and by the grace of God, I did happen to find a job, but not everybody's that lucky. I know a lot of people in the recovery community who struggle with this. I know a lot of people who call where I work weekly, can't find a job. And the whole point is making a livable wage. Because to be honest with you, as the overnight manager at McDonald's in New Britain, making $10.85 an hour, trying to work 60 hours a week just to pay my bills for my children was not easy. And by the grace of God, I just got my own apartment a few, months ago. And, without a job that paid me where I could pay my bills, I wouldn't have any of that. Either would my children, they would still be being affected. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, good morning. My name is Cindy Prizio, and some of you have heard me speak before. I represented a civil rights organization called Connecticut for One Standard of Justice. And we represent a group of people that the state of Connecticut continues to create a special class for. And they're the people known as and are labeled as sex offenders. So I'm not going to use that label anymore today because words hurt. But what I want to say to Representative McGee is that you have a great posse. And I'm so happy we're all here today. I was at the first round table, and I'd never sat at the round table because we don't get invited to the table. But I'd like to see more representation from families and offenders sitting in your posse. So next year, that's what I think we need. I want to tell you about one of my members. He was a great guy. He was about 24 years old, and he got together with a younger girl under 16, and he had no idea of her age. It was a one-night hookup. And 8 years later, he got arrested. He had already been married, had a 3-year-old girl, put his wife through nursing school, had a great job, and he gets arrested for sex assault too. And because we're a strict liability state that says there is no excuse. You didn't know her age, you should have. And so he went off to prison 8 years later for a year. He gets paroled. The restaurant he left, he was on track for a management position. He goes into prison. They say, "We want you back." Gets out of prison, goes back to the restaurant. Probation and parole don't let him be a front-end person because he would be working with alcohol. Not drinking it, but working with it. So they give him a back-end position. Because my constituency is on a public registry with his picture, his address, one of his friend's ex-boyfriends outed him as a sex offender to the restaurant. And basically, they extorted the restaurant and said, if you don't fire him, we will be out here putting posters on all the cars in this community with his picture on it and where he's employed. So the manager, we're a hire and fire at will state, the management had no choice but to fire him. How do you do this? I was on a call the other day with, is it pronounced Catel? The first criminal justice call, 3 o'clock this past Monday. If anyone's interested, they're going to be doing it once a month. And I heard that Connecticut is a second chance state. Well, it's not going to be the second chance state if we continue to discriminate against certain groups of people. And my offenders of sexual offenses, which, by the way, the next 95% of sexual offenses are being done today and tomorrow and yesterday by people not on the registry. So we've got it wrong. We must bring down the public registry. There's no greater shame than banishment from an entire society. And I want to tell you about the little town of Naugatuck. January, one of the things we're looking at as an advocacy organization is we look at public education, we look at dealing with legislators, And the third thing is we're looking really where the state of Connecticut has violated the constitutional rights of these people, and we want to hold the courts accountable. So on Naugatuck, January 2nd, publishes an article in the newspaper that says the town has enacted a child safety zone, an ordinance that banishes citizens, taxpayers, because offenders of sexual offenses pay taxes if they're lucky enough to get a job. And so the Burgess of Naugatuck, I don't know if anyone lives here from Naugatuck, and I apologize, because Naugatuck is only 1 out of 10 towns that has this ordinance, but Naugatuck was the newest kid on the block. And the Burgess on the town council says, sex offenders belong in prison and then hell. How dare he? How dare he talk about an entire group of people like that? Whenever we lump people together as a group, we disservice all humanity. We have to look at people as individuals. And the ban says that these guys can't go to libraries, town-owned, town-leased buildings, parks. I'm wrapping up. Yeah, so anyway, let me just see if I have anything else. I'm here to ask you to end discrimination now. And we've got it in all parts of the Department of Correction, probation, parole, the statutes. And lastly, I want to mention, we've just partnered, yes, we have a partner, with the National Association of Social Workers to show a movie called Untouchable. And I'd been in touch with your office very last minute because the point was to bring social workers together. But anyone involved in reentry must see this movie to really understand what's happening to this group of people. And we're taking it on the road. We'll be in New Haven 2 days in February and then coming back to Hartford. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'll take Earl and then go over to you, James. Did I miss anybody right here?
Okay, so I won't be standing up, but my name is Earl Bloodworth, and I'm representing the City of New Haven for Project Fresh Start and the Warren Kimball Reentry Project. I'm also newly installed for the co-chair for the Reentry Roundtable for New Haven. And just dovetailing off of a lot of things that have already been said, one of the main things that we are seeing are people not dealing with the PTSD from dealing with the system or the urban trauma. It's a major thing because we can work and get individuals jobs and housing, but if their mental foundation is not stable, we will see recidivism again. I think it's very important to note how key these services are for these individuals, not just for them, but as somebody else said, for the entire family. We really need to be focusing on the whole unit as opposed to just the individual, because the reverberation of the effects of incarceration, it's just like a rock thrown into a pond. The ripple effect is major, not only on the family, but the community. There have been studies showing just how much money is lost on one city block due to incarceration. So if we don't start focusing on this, or these individual programs throughout the state are not collaborative, and we don't look at the actual financial impact of the work that's being done with reduction in recidivism and reinvesting that money that's being reduced from the doles of, it's approximately $53,000, $56,000 to house a person.
It ebbed and flowed, but close, yes.
Close around there. So, you know, if we're all jointly working in an effort to reduce recidivism and reduce the roles in the state that money is going towards, and that money should be reinvested back into the community with these individuals. So that's pretty much what I'd like to say.
Thank you, James, and then I'll come back to Fernando.
Yeah, so I'm not going to tell my whole story.
Speak up a little bit so they can hear.
I'm not going to tell my whole story. On the contrary, I kind of believe that when you individualize an issue, it actually leads to a lack of humanity on what is not seen. And most time you hear stories, you hear extremes. You hear the sexist or the extreme failures, and a lot of the atrocities and the traumas are in the mundane, in the everyday, right? Of the opioid crisis, you know, my father was a heroin addict who was given death parole out of Cheshire because he had full-blown AIDS from using dirty needles. And when I was 6 years old, and I wound up in Cheshire by the time I was 18, I did 19 and a half years. I did 14 of those years in Cheshire. I'm now a policy analyst at Hartford Community Loan Fund. I've been home about 15 months. I really want to speak to incarceration because you can't deal with reentry without dealing with an incarcerated body and looking at what the stint of prison looks like and what it should look like. I was in a lifers group, which had I not been released, Warden Murphy would have had me in the True Unit as one of the mentors. I was a part of structuring some of the programs that are actually the models that are being ran in the block right now. However, I'm home on juvenile parole. When the legislation that was written by Andrew that created the parole system for juveniles, I was one of the first 10 to be released. Yet I kind of get frustrated at this 18 to 25 argument that is being pushed through the state, because the reality is that the majority of black and brown men who are incarcerated, 90% are incarcerated between the age of 18 and 25, right? So if you look at an individual who's 45 now, you can't look at the fact that he's a 45-year-old. Look at the fact that when was he incarcerated? If he was incarcerated at 21, then the herefore language of bills that we have passed and the herefore stance that we articulate when we talk about this demographic, it shines a light on today's demographic and all these issues, brain development, and it casts a blinding shadow over men who are outside of this age group, but who suffered. They are left out. So we want to take into consideration all these mitigating factors now, but we don't want to look back and say, well, we have men that have been incarcerated since the early 90s, the late 80s, who suffered the same thing, who suffered the same traumas prior to prison because they come from these communities that started in the 80s, were impacted by the crack era, the heroin, before it was a crisis, when it was just, my father was just a dirty dope fiend, and there's no conversation around what do you do with this Asian population? How do you help them? What are the alternatives to incarceration for them? I came home 36. I'm co-chair of the participatory budgeting steering committee. I'm on the Connecticut Food Systems Alliance steering committee. I've held employment as a policy analyst for the last 13 months. I'm a part of Sandy Lamonico's Smart Justice Coalition. Like, I'm active. I'm a project coordinator for Know Thy Neighbor, part of the Faith-Based Initiative program, right? So there's an avenue for men who are outside that age group who have a lot of times autodidactically changed. Their changes it's not because of incarceration, it's in spite of incarceration, but they're stuck. And there's no light being shined on that because we focus so much on this one age demographic. The mentors who are running this block, who are actively involved in these men's lives, are men who have been incarcerated since they were that age. And they said they've been incarcerated 20, 24 years, 25 years or more, and they do not look like the children that they were when they came into prison. But there's no conversation being had around what do we do with this? What does second chance look like for them? They have been locked outside the conversation, and not just men and women, and so a part of what I would like to see is to have this conversation expanded. I want this conversation to be uncomfortable, because it can't be. You can't have growth and change with a comfortable conversation. It doesn't happen. And so, a lot for me, often when you find something specific, you find it because it's somewhat generally acceptable. And we can push this agenda, and that's cool, I get it, but at some point, it has to move into the uncomfortable to really impact the system. Stop.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, I'm Fernando Muñiz with Community Solutions. Many of you have pointed out some of the challenges in not being able to access services for the people that we serve. A flip side of that problem for many of our folks is that they're involved with multiple systems, and those helping systems don't always coordinate well. And so, we'll have folks in our programs who are DCF involved, who are under parole supervision, who are involved in family court, and the multiple obligations and requirements of all those frontline folks
are often pulling them in different directions that are real barriers to successful reentry and employment. And so, a recommendation that actually requires no policy change is a wraparound, better coordinated system of care within local communities for those frontline people to be able to coordinate well the services that they're providing to our client population.
Thank you. Fred?
I'm Fred Hodges, formerly incarcerated. One of the things that I can remember being incarcerated and looking at the news and seeing when people would get arrested at McDonald's, they were formerly incarcerated, they would say, lock the door, don't ever let them out, they don't deserve a job, they don't deserve this here. And one of the things that I've always said when I was away is when I get out, I want to change the face of that. I'm home now for 12 years, came home in 2006. I went to Hartford first, Bridgewater. They sent me to Hartford because, basically because of my past, and they didn't want me to go there. I completed the program in Hartford, the halfway house there, went to Bridgewater. Didn't have nowhere to go. Well, I went to my sister's house. But the most important thing to me when I went to Bridgewater was family reentry. Family reentry had a treatment program there, where they had a mentoring program there that was run every Thursday night from 6 to 8 o'clock. And it was similar to NA or AA, where people who were formerly incarcerated came home and they had a place to go, to voice their opinion, to talk about certain situations and problems and obstacles that they were going through. And when you got other people that been there like you get a chance to see, well, I don't want to do what he did, I want to do what he did. And you can't measure the importance of having people who've been where you've been at, and now you see them being successful, and so you have sort of a blueprint now. One of the things that we keep talking about, we're talking about justice reinvestment, and that's good. But the state has to do a little bit more also. And I understand we have community providers in here, and I give my thumbs up to everybody who's involved with the nonprofits, because without you, none of this stuff would be possible today. But what I gotta say about the state, we gotta hold the state a little bit more accountable. Because a lot of the cutbacks in the program since I've been home, crime is starting to go up. Crime is starting to go up because there's no programs to go to. The treatment is very important. If the cognitive stuff, if you don't have a person that can't change their mind or don't know where to go to think about the behavior that they're about to get into and talk to somebody, you're going to have the same person doing the same thing that they've done before they came home. I can't talk enough about the cognitive stuff. And as our budget keep cutting back in justice reinvestment, the state can do more. They can do more on vocational levels. The state have facilities. The state have facilities where they have DOT trucks, where they can train people to be Class B certification CDL drivers. The state has a lot of facilities where they feed people at. You can get people serve-safe. So we serve-safe license where they can be cooks. They got tow mowers and warehouses. They can be warehouse drivers, learn how to do on forklifts, because there's a lot of entry-level jobs that's out there. One of the things we do pre-release inside, we have a DOC house, and we have an 8-bed semi-independent residential. So I'm in Willard every Tuesday on a pre-release side. We do a generic assessment for the guys while we're in there. We do a more intense assessment once they come out to our program at Family Reentry. We still have guys that come out today, although we don't have the treatment side in Family Reentry, we have the residential side, but guys are still coming home today needing these services, and the services are being cut. Now, what I'm saying to everybody here, our policymakers, we have to get them on board. I was in this very room about a year ago where Fasano said, he believes that if a person has been home and been off the books for 5 years, they should get an automatic expungement. We have to start moving the needle towards that. We have to start thinking about that. We talk about substance abuse. 85 to 95% of the people incarcerated is related to substance abuse. Even though they might have a robbery, they rob because they needed to get high. So you're talking about substance abuse, the collateral damage that DOC is closing prisons now, but you have tens of thousands of ex-felons out there that have felonies that can't get jobs related to substance abuse, and at one particular time, they were called drug addicts, junkies, this and that, and now they're talking about it's a brain disease. It was a brain disease in the 60s. Well, all of a sudden now, we're understanding that it's a brain disease in 2000. So we need to really, the state needs to pick their game up and do something about as far as expungement is concerned for a lot of the people who's been home 18 years, 20 years, you guys been home 20 years, 18 years, can't get a promotion on their job, don't want to talk about they were ex-offender. We have this organization called Nothing About Us Without Us. We did a march on June 14th while the governor was doing his thing. It wasn't an adversarial thing we were doing. We were just trying to highlight some points that the state is doing a lot, but we can do a lot more. And all I want to say is that we have, I want to commend Brandon for what he's doing now. Scott, I talk to Scott all the time and what he's doing, and I'm not saying that because he's here. I was inside the prison where a lot of the things that's going on before he got there was not going on. We still got a long way to go, but we got to fight together, we got to stick together, and we got to get the policymakers involved. We got to get them involved. We definitely need a little bit more money. I want to thank you very much for Brandon putting this on, and I'm here every time. I can remember when I came on in 2006, I've been coming up here on the front line since then. They was closing the doors on me. They was like, we don't want to hear that stuff. But I want to appreciate you, man, and everybody and what you're doing. Let's keep it up, keep the narrative going. One voice, nothing about us without us. We need to keep this going. Thank you very much.
I'm very aware of the time and the hours far spent, and I know each of you have meetings and other things to do. So I'll take one more comment question from Stephen, and then I'll take from you, and you're the last one, okay? And I'll cut you off if you're too long. But Stephen, go ahead.
Just on behalf of the Commission on Women, Children, and Seniors, I really wanted to thank this panel because I think what you're showcasing is that you recognize that the men and women who are reintegrated into society do not exist in a vacuum. You know, whether it's from accusation to integration, we treat them in a vacuum. We treat them, but we forget about theirs. And I think what's important is that as these men and women are reintegrating into society, we remember that it is people of color, the poor, and the afflicted that we so comfortably built this country on, the backs upon which we built this country on, and we so uncomfortably reintegrate into our society. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Valentine Doyle. Oh, maybe I could, should I use the mic?
Sure.
I'm with the Alternatives to Violence Project, and we do workshops in about 30 states, about 50 countries, in prisons and in the community, in schools, on ways of dealing with conflict without becoming violent. Conflict is inevitable. Violence doesn't have to be. And we don't have community programs in Connecticut, but we have now 5 prison programs, the newest being Cheshire and Garner. And so our reentry work we do before people leave, because as you learn not to react to violence or to conflict of some kind with violence, you solve problems nonviolently. That's one less reason you'll be locked up again. So I hope we can be doing our reentry work in all prisons in the state at some point, but I think we've changed a lot of lives and a lot of approaches to life. And I wish you could meet some of our best co-facilitators, but you can't because they're locked up. But we teach in prisons we have mixed teams of outsiders like me and insiders, and they have the credibility. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. So in closing, I again would like to thank the Commission on Equity and Opportunity. Werner, he's still here. He's the silent force behind a lot of this stuff. So thank you so much for the work that you do. Robin, co-chair of our Labor and Employees Committee, and all of her colleagues, the formerly incarcerated that helped to inform this study, my posse up here that's been helping me out. But to all of you in this room, thank you. The conversation, it better not stop. The work that we're doing, it cannot stop. I do not want you all to forget about our youth. I think you talked about the various demographics that we need to expand. I agree with you, James. But even taking that a step further, we have a lot of young people re-entering the community from many of these juvenile centers that need our support. And so we have to figure out how to better support that population as well. I'll continue to fight alongside all of my colleagues. If you have any policy recommendations or just things that you didn't have a chance to talk through before this large crowd, please feel free to email me, call me. We're here. Can't promise you that all your ideas will be voted on, but I promise you that we can at least have a conversation for starters. So again, thank you.